order the special meeting of the Land Acknowledgement Statement Advisory Committee at 6:32 p.m. And we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Brenhag.
Okay, I guess it's my first time doing this. You can place your right hand over your heart and I guess follow along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We will now have the roll call.
Councilmember Menchaca.
Here.
Councilmember Pooh.
Here.
Commissioner Brenhall.
Here.
Commissioner Maharo.
Here.
Vice Chair Jennings Nunez.
Here.
And Chair Lubicic.
Here. All right, so the first order of business is approval of agenda order. Are there any objections to the agenda order? Hearing none, seeing none, the agenda order is approved. So I don't think we need a vote or anything on the agenda order, am I correct? All right, we can keep on and move on to the second item on tonight's agenda, which is public comment. This is the time. Oh, excuse me, yes.
Just one moment. So I'm just going to read just a brief statement.
I'm sorry.
And then we'll be moving on. So tonight's meeting is live streamed on Cable Channel 3 and our online platforms. Please email all public comments to Matthew Morales-Stevens, mmorales-stevens@sgch.org, no later than the time the item is considered by the advisory committee tonight. Comments will be read for up to 3 minutes each. Comments received after the end of the public comment section will be forwarded to the advisory committee after the meeting. If you wish to be added to the distribution list to receive advisory committee agendas, please email your request to mmorales-stevens@sgch.org.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That's an important thing to have stated. So now that brings us to the second item on the agenda, the public comment. This is the time set aside for members of the public to address the Land Acknowledgement Statement Advisory Committee on items of interest that are not on the agenda but are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the LAS Advisory Committee. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the LAS Advisory Committee cannot answer any questions or take any action until such time as the matter may appear as an item on a future agenda. Matthew, do we have any public comments for tonight's meeting?
We do not.
Thank you. So this brings us to the third item on our agenda, and these are our action items. So we'll close the time for public comment. Let's see, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. Do we have any public comment on these the action items?
We do not.
Okay. So the first item is approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of September 28th?
This is Vice Chair Jennings. I move that we approve the minutes from the September 14th meeting.
Do I have a second?
I second that.
Thank you. So we have a motion made by Vice Chair Jennings Nunez and a second by Commissioner Moharo. Danielle, would you please take the vote?
Of course, Chair. Commissioner Brenhall.
Aye.
Commissioner Maharo.
Aye.
Vice Chair Jennings Nunez.
Aye.
Chair Lubicic.
Aye.
Motion passed by a vote of 4 ayes, 0 nays, and 0 abstentions.
Thank you. Our fourth item on the agenda is discussion items. We are going to review the proposed purpose statement and finalize questions. I hope that the LAS committee members had time to review the purpose statement and list of questions for tribal leaders proposed by the staff. We do have time. Let's see. Matthew, help me. Are we going to allow for public comment before discussion of this item or after?
The public comment will close right now. And then we actually don't have any public comments for this section. And then if I may just provide a few staff comments to get the conversation started and then jump right into it. Is that okay?
That would be great. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So just a couple items as we're going through this. So I appreciate everyone putting all of those comments out there and generating all of those questions last meeting. We did our best to compile everything onto the memo that's included in the agenda packet. We also tried to create one single purpose statement based off of all of the comments that were included. So feel free to take a look through all of that. And if there's anything that needs to be added, removed, or changed in any way, now is the perfect time to do so. Hopefully at the end of this discussion item, everything will kind of be wrapped up in a bow, ready to go for the next meeting and presentation to the tribal leaders. One final item is just a recommendation to narrow some of the questions in a little bit. That way it's staying specifically to the purpose of the land acknowledgement statement. There may be some questions as we're moving through that might be more appropriate for a different venue. I'll use the example as for the HERE Commission. They're working on a project that is celebrating the heritage of the Native American culture, and specifically here in San Gabriel. So maybe some of the questions that you're going through it, you might find that they might be more appropriate at that time versus specifically in fulfilling the purpose of developing a land acknowledgement statement. So with that said, unless anyone has any further questions, I'll turn it back over to Chair Lubasich.
Thank you, Matthew. Are there any questions? I see that Councilmember Menchaca does.
Yes, I just wanted to, first of all, just say hello to everyone. This is actually my first meeting. I happen to be, well, it was kind of a destiny, I guess. I happened to be at my daughter's graduation in New York when we had the meeting. And to my pleasant surprise, when the graduation began, they had an acknowledgement statement. And it was the first time they had ever had one. It was very brief. It was 30 words. But I was very excited and it was impactful, very, very impactful. And that's how the graduation started. And so I did listen to the meeting, and I understand I don't have a voting privilege here, but I am here as council member who is to advise, guide, hopefully be a resource of some sort. And so I hope I can just share some of my thoughts from someone who didn't get to have that type of deliberation with you last time, but I did listen to the meeting, like I said. And one of the things that really came to mind was the fact that we do need to try to keep this brief and short. And so the questions, although very, very valuable, seem like they could be maybe separated into two different categories. One that is directly related to the acknowledgement statement, and the other maybe to a different group, whether it's historical here. Those are the two commissions that come to mind. Because I think there is so much to unpack here, but the land acknowledgement statement, to be powerful and to have significance, I really believe it has to be short. And so, that would be just my first suggestion as we continue with this conversation. It could be land acknowledgement statement, and the other could be some type of like additional support for Indigenous community, additional interaction of some sort. But if you read these questions, I do believe they need to be separated into categories of sorts.
Councilwoman Menchaca, but at least for this agenda item, my understanding is that we're kind of discussing the purpose statement. So I don't know if this is a time for questions concerning the purpose statement, and if we're going to discuss beyond that afterwards. We have just because we have a separate agenda item specifically concerning the question portion.
Okay. Well, I was trying to relate because I know my comments, they're all only advisory, and since I didn't participate last time, I wasn't quite sure how to divvy it up. and then my other comments were about the logistics, and maybe it's under the purpose, I'm not sure, but the logistics meaning I wasn't sure if this committee was going to ask these questions in a public venue, or were two people going to be assigned to ask these questions? Because I think some of these questions could either be very private, very painful, or just, they could be angry about the situation. And so I don't know, and I just wanted to add that. Again, maybe it's under purpose, maybe it's under questions. I know, that there's been talk about having some type of oral history, not necessarily just everything in writing. We had our historic context statement last night, but would some of this lend itself more to oral history, or has to be a public meeting? Because again, if it's a short statement, 30 words or less, I mean, I'm not sure having a 2-3 hour meeting is going to lend itself for at least the purpose of this committee. And so those are just my comments. I did have an additional question that I wanted to have the committee consider, but I'll leave that for the next agenda item.
If I may interject briefly again, my apologies. I'll try to keep it brief. So for this agenda item, it is specific to the memo that was brought forth to the committee tonight. So it actually does include the proposed purpose statement as well as to finalize the questions that were developed. So that is all encompassing here. So feel free to talk about any of that in whichever order, and I'll turn that back over to Chair Lubasic if you are looking to go in a particular order within this agenda item. That's of course your right to do so, but within that discussion item, it does incorporate all of that.
Thank you so much for that clarification, Matthew. I would like to recommend that perhaps we start with the purpose statement and see if we're comfortable with the language that was drafted, and then move on to the questions, because I do agree there's going to be some cleaning up and organization that we need to do. And I'm assuming from the cheering, if you're picking it up in my audio, that something great is happening in the Dodger game. So I thought I hid far enough back in the house that the cheering would be held off. So if we could start first with the purpose statement and then move on to the questions, that would be my recommendation for this agenda item.
Chair Lubasic, I like the way that you run your HP CRC meetings, where you kind of go down the line and call and see if each person has comments. Would you do that?
Absolutely, I'm happy to do that. So since you've made that recommendation, if you wouldn't mind, Vice Chair Jennings-Nunez, do you have any comments or suggestions related to the purpose statement?
Yes, I always have comments, it looks like. So, but mine are very short concerning the purpose statement, that I thought it was very appropriate and just what we wanted. It is short and concise and gets our point across. And I sent Chair Lubasic some comments just in case I wasn't able to join. So I'm just going to kind of read those through the night. But I said that this is really a great start for our land acknowledgement statement. I see us adding maybe 2 more sentences to it, hopefully, but that something like this purpose statement would be incorporated into the land acknowledgement statement also. So I would vote to proceed with the purpose statement the way it is.
Excuse me for interrupting. Just to clarify, you meant an addition of sentences as we're drafting the land acknowledgement statement, not that we need more in the purpose statement?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
No, the purpose statement is right where it should be.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Maharo, do you have any comments or questions on the purpose statement?
I'd have to agree as well. I think it's short, concise, and to the point. We don't obviously want it too wordy, and I think it's exactly what we need.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Brenhog.
Yeah, I agree. I actually had a little bit of trouble finding it, but I just found it and read it. And I really like it.
Thank you. And Councilmember Pu, do you have any comments or feedback on the purpose statement?
No, thank you.
And then Councilwoman Machaka.
Not on the purpose statement, no.
All right, and I would echo that I think that staff did a very good job capturing our discussion at the last meeting, and I'm very happy with the purpose statement as it stands. So I think it really did reflect our discussion. So now we have the more challenging piece of the questions. And so again, we can just go around the committee and offer feedback. I'm hoping staff is game to sort of track comments on the various questions. Is that going to be an organized way for you to capture? All right. So I'll go the same order that I did last time and start with Vice Chair Jennings-Nunez.
Do you want us to comment on all of the questions or go question? So again,
Sure.
I'll just read what I sent you. So in terms of the first one, do you want a land acknowledgement statement? I understand why we want to ask that. I just would finesse it a little bit more to kind of say if a land acknowledgement statement is part of kind of a greater citywide acknowledgement of the contributions of the tribal people of this area, do you support its creation? You know, and so we can just word it a little bit different. For the second one, how would you like to be identified? I think that's going to be our most complex discussion. And so we definitely need their input. In the same line, would they, you know, would there be any concern with us adding other nomenclature depending on the different groups? And I think somebody got to that in the, can the names of the tribes be included in one? Can different names of the tribes or different tribes be included in the same statement? So number 3, what are the indigenous names of places, sites, and geographical features in San Gabriel? What I wrote was, I think this is one of those areas where you need to do your own work. So this is information that is available in many places and resources, and I just don't think it's appropriate for us to go and ask them to give us a history lesson on their culture and people. That's some work that we can do ourselves. Should the statement be translated into native languages? I don't think we have that capacity. From what I've read of the language as it still exists, there are people who are working very hard to kind of teach it and learn it. I just don't think we have the capacity to do it. And I would not want to try to say our land acknowledgement statement in a Tongva language. I think that would be more disrespectful than saying it in English, quite honestly, just because I wouldn't be able to pronounce most of the words correctly. Are there programs where the languages are being taught? Again, someone mentioned that the HERE Commission is working on a Native American Heritage Month celebration, and we're going to be inviting, hopefully, Chief Morales to our meeting. And so I think some of the questions that people are curious about can be incorporated into that HERE Commission meeting, because as Councilwoman Menchaca mentioned, they're really kind of more of an interest question as opposed to information we really need to create this land acknowledgement statement. So that's one. The next one, in terms of what are the ways of keeping your culture alive, I think that's something we can ask during our HERE Commission meeting. In terms of how many people are in tribal people are still in our San Gabriel area, that is a great question to ask in terms of our impact with this statement. The other questions, the present day challenges, again, something that we can cover in our HERE Commission meeting. And then are there other organizations that we can contact to provide additional guidance and education as we develop the land acknowledgement statement, is the way that I would word that next question. And then an open-ended question at the end, I agree with. So those are my comments.
Thank you very much. Commissioner O'Hara.
Wow, thank you, Vice Chair Jennings-Nunez. That was pretty in-depth, and I agree a lot. I hadn't thought about some of those points that you made, and I appreciate that you're so thoughtful and considerate in the fact that it's very true. If this was translated, or we asked for a translation to a native language, would we be pronouncing it, or would we insult anyone? Would it, we have to be careful with things like that. I don't think that would be necessary for our statement per se. And there is a lot here. I think a lot of these points could probably go back to the HERE Commission, not necessarily for our statement, but just in general to have a conversation with these leaders. I think it's still okay to bring some of this up. It may not be used directly for a statement, but I, for one, would love a conversation like that. But again, if it's going to be used in the HERE Commission, obviously I can always listen in as well. But I think staff, you did a good job putting it all together because it was a long conversation in our last meeting. So those are pretty much my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Maharo. Commissioner Brenhall.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that we're trying to have a meeting with Chief Morales and the HERE Commission as well. Because I think it is important to figure out like how we are making a commitment to support the Indigenous people here. And, you know, creating a land acknowledgement statement is an action, and I feel like it's a great step, but it doesn't, to me, signify a long-term commitment per se. Because, you know, some people could just say it's just a statement or it's just words. And even in the purpose statement that we have here, it says that it serves as a clear and ongoing commitment from the city to respect and acknowledge the Native people. So I'm just wondering, like, how is a statement going to do that? One, I guess. And I think it's possible for it to be the ongoing relationship within like the HERE Commission or within other entities of the city. I guess, I mean, Councilmember Menchaca talked about that because maybe, you know, we are just here kind of to create this land acknowledgement statement. And so it might be beyond our scope to talk about what it means to have that ongoing relationship and support. But I think that was kind of the gist behind some of these questions, right, that we came up with was identifying these things. And so we can figure out how can we be a good support and how can we commit to, you know, traveling alongside them and not just acknowledging that they were here first, but also what it means to respect and acknowledge them here in the present and in the future. So I don't know. I don't know if we want to have a discussion about that or if you just want my comments or.
No, I really do appreciate, I think you've encapsulated nicely some of the directions that our discussion went in the first meeting. That was, I think, important to say. Words on paper can mean much, much more if we actually have action behind them. And I think that's a powerful thing to consider. So if there are specific questions that you think need some wordsmithing or other comments, please share them. But I think you've given some good feedback.
Well, I'm just wondering because I guess our purpose in this committee is to draft this statement, right? Or to create this statement. And it's not necessarily to figure out how this ongoing relationship is gonna happen. Or is it? I don't know.
But I think you're correct in pointing out what we are saying in the purpose statement, that we are making an ongoing commitment. And I'm very glad that there are already commitments being honored in future HERE Commission meetings. I certainly hope that in the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission that we continue this on. And I think you're right. We probably as a committee need to have further discussion about, will we make recommendations onto council, onto these commissions about steps that they can take based on what we learn. But in terms of our purpose, it is, I think, to lay the foundation for, or to create the land acknowledgement statement, but also to lay the foundation for that ongoing support.
Okay. I mean, with that said, I feel like practically, I agree a lot with what Vice Chair Jennings Nunez said about the specific questions and how we phrase them. Because I do feel like it's important to learn from the tribal leaders, you know, in however much they are wanting to share with us. I don't know what this means for public or private meetings or, whatever, but I do want to give them the ability to not just in the scope of a land acknowledgement statement share, but even beyond that as well. I mean, I don't know if that's just in the HERE Commission, or not just, but like also in the HERE Commission, but I do think that it is relevant to our purpose.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Brenhog. Councilmember Pu?
Thank you for the opportunity. I actually don't have many comments with respect to the questions. I think that rather than being specifically how they would be phrased, they just sort of were meant to cover certain issue areas. And I just wanted to also highlight and appreciate the sort of discussion that happened at the last meeting as well as at this meeting, and in terms of just everybody providing their input. And I think that that's really important. And I feel like there's already, with what we've got already, there's a very solid foundation and good direction for the committee, and that I feel very confident about the direction that you all are heading in. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Pu. And then Councilmember Menchaca.
Thank you. The only question I was going to suggest, and I think it's already kind of embedded there, is if there was a land acknowledgement statement that they have or they liked, because it's becoming much more popular. If I saw it in New York, I'm sure it's all over now. There might be one that has touched their hearts already, and it would be interesting to see if that's something they would like to share. So that was really the only thing, but everything else very well thought out, and a lot there. And then just at some point, I just like to understand the logistics on the questions, if that was going to be, is the only option is to have a public meeting, or are there other options that the committee has considered when asking these questions? And I think that our chair, I think you probably know all the leaders more so than probably anyone here. If you feel that they're comfortable responding to these questions in a public meeting, then it's a moot point. But I think we should have at least something to consider if they're not.
Thank you very much. I agree. We do need to talk about the logistics. Matthew, please.
So just a few notes. So if the committee as a whole decides that they do want to meet with the tribal leaders, we will need to follow the Brown Act, and it would essentially the meeting would run exactly as it is tonight. The agenda would be posted. The tribal leader would get on the call, and then we'd follow the agenda order. If you were to break up, let's say with just the two HPCRC members or just the two HERE Commission members, and sit down and speak with, let's say, Chief Morales on your own, and then report back to the committee with that information. That would not be, as my understanding is, that would not need to be a publicly noticed meeting. So essentially you could have it in a conference room, take the notes, and then report back to the committee if the committee so chose to do it that way. And there would be that level of kind of privacy that would not be available through the publicly noticed meeting on the Channel 3 as well as YouTube.
Matthew, this is Samantha with Community Development. Would you say that discussion should be had with the next agenda item as part of the action plan?
Perfect, thank you.
That sounds good. Thank you very much. Just to come back around to the questions, and I'm so grateful to have members from the two commissions, because I feel that we may not always know sort of what the jurisdiction or purview or plans of the other commission are. And so it is really helpful to hear what is being planned in the HERE Commission. I think my concern is being very careful in our assumptions, being very careful, assuming that all of the tribal elders we speak to will know what a land acknowledgement statement is. I would expect that we would be doing some education. When this first came to my attention more than a year ago, as something that I thought would be helpful and good for San Gabriel to have. When I did my preliminary outreach to the tribal elders that I do know, none of them had heard of a land acknowledgement statement before. So there was a piece of education about what that was. And most of their responses were that they wanted to learn more. I also think we want to be very careful in assuming how often they have been asked about their history and their culture and what landmarks are available to them. Having come through the process of the historic context statement, pushing information to that first context now that we have on the prehistory of San Gabriel was really quite challenging. It required the work of a lot of scholars digging into a lot of different areas. And in past panels that I've participated in, some of the indigenous knowledge is knowledge that they hold very close and tight to their own hearts. They have had things taken from them in the past, and they're not always willing to divulge their histories and stories. And so I do think that we want to be very careful in our assumptions. I would love for the process of speaking with our tribal elders to be one where we are really educating ourselves so that in our different commissions, we are able to make recommendations and take actions to support. And so while I agree that translating the land acknowledgement statement in many respects misses the audience that we're trying to educate, we're really trying to speak to people who may not be aware of the persistence and resilience of our tribes. I also was struck, my daughter is a student at Gabriel High School, and outside the Eagle's Nest, they have a rock with the Tongva phrase, "We are still here." And that's a very powerful statement. I think that there are places, if there are phrases or statements that are meaningful to the people we speak to, that we should certainly include them. My hope is that we really take the time in these interviews to allow for confusion, anger, maybe happiness at the opportunity that they finally get to share, for education, that we really try to leave ourselves open to allow the voices of our tribal elders to rise as much as possible. I know that I have a lot to learn always, and that process can be painful, but hopefully working together, we can create something that's really good and lasting. So I think certainly there's some wordsmithing, but I would be very interested in knowing what programs are they doing that we're not aware of? Are they doing them here in San Gabriel or somewhere else? Are they finding communities that have been more supportive, and can we bring those home here? I echo very much what Commissioner Brenhog said, that I would like this to live more than just on paper. I would really like it to live in action. And I'm looking forward to the work of the HERE Commission in helping guide our city and being a better ally to the Indigenous people that are still here among us. So I think overall, I really do like many of the questions. And I recognize that we're sort of tipping into oral history, and it may be my own bias as a historian that I'm very comfortable with that and like that idea. And so I will certainly defer to any other questions that people would like to see removed or altered. But I personally would love to see a broad discussion, one where we're really learning from the elders that live in our community. So that being said, I think Vice Chair Jenny Nunez's point about translation is well made. Are there other questions that we feel are truly out of place that we'd like to strike? Or from this point on, is it just more wordsmithing? And I can go back around the committee, but if anyone would like to motion with their hand, I'm watching and can grab any comments. So seeing none, are we comfortable finalizing our purpose statement and the list of questions with the deletion of the question about translation into the native language?
For staff clarification, sorry, Vice
Please.
Chair Jennings, I think you no, okay. Just for staff clarification, so we're removing the question regarding translation of the land acknowledgement statement. And I believe also Vice Chair Jennings had a few other items that she thought might be better kept with the HERE Commission for when they also meet with the tribal leaders. I think one of the items was what are the indigenous names of places, sites, and geographical features in San Gabriel. I think that one was more towards, you know, the research can be done prior to the meeting rather than asking. Is that something that the committee wanted to keep in or remove?
I guess my only concern with that is that, again, I want them to understand that we are respectful and feel honored enough, I guess, to meet with them to have done some of this research on our own, as opposed to I'm just walking in and can you just, you know, teach me? It is not their responsibility to do all of that. And that's not saying that any of us would be able to, it's not saying that we can't learn from them or that I would not like to hear their, have them to educate me. I just don't want to put all of the burden of that onto another person, onto Chief Morales or any of those people, that I feel that it shows some respect to them that I took the time to learn something and to come with some knowledge on my own about their culture, about their tribes, and then for them to build on that, as opposed to just coming as this blank slate and can you do all the work to teach me? So that's where that was coming from, not because I am not interested in those places that they do hold sacred and dear, and I know that they can shed light where I can't just Google something or find a book about it. But I just want to make sure that we are coming having done some research and bringing some understanding with this. And then as for the other questions in terms of the HERE Commission, they're just wonderful questions that whether we ask at this meeting for the land acknowledgement statement or not, you will hear us ask them again, probably if Chief Morales does come to our meeting, because they're just really great questions that I would hope we can share with the community the answers to them.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Jennings Nunez. Are there other comments or questions? I think I was the one who proposed the questions about the names of places, sites, and geographical features. And I was thinking about that largely, really, and I'm glad to see that you acknowledge it as part of the HERE Commission as well, but I was thinking about cultural landscapes, which is one of the things that we do recognize in the Historic Preservation and Cultural Resource Commission. And waterways are always sources of life. We have washes that run throughout our city. And I think that my interest in that question was understanding the patterns of life, and if those are still something that are recognized, talked about, that have names that we don't know. And so that was really sort of my intent in understanding. If we're acknowledging the land, what land are we talking about? It shouldn't be the land of Temple or the land of Alhambra. It should be the land that the people who lived here occupied and knew. So it was really, for me, a point of education and helping understand those landscapes. So again, I agree that is something that the separate commissions can certainly continue to pursue. I don't know the last time that any of our tribal elders have been invited to share in this capacity. So I'm maybe being a little overzealous in trying to open the doors as wide as I can and learn as much as possible.
I have to agree. I think just overall, the conversation with these elders, it's something that I personally am really looking forward to. And I agree with you. It's educating ourselves as well. learning from them. Again, it goes back, you being a historian or just the love of history and the interest in history. But then I also agree that we really do need to do our homework and come in with something. You know, we need to have them understand that we're as prepared as we can possibly, and then accepting of any information that they're going to be willing to give us. I'm just really excited to be able to meet with them. I never have. And I think the conversation may start with one question, and before we know it, it's answering another question. And that's what I'm looking forward to. I think all of these are very good questions.
Do we have information on like how much tribal elders or anybody has been involved with the city, or been to different like events or a part of different meetings, or is there a history of that?
I think, so I believe Rebecca has probably the most history on kind of their involvement with city projects, or I should say city events per se, or city programs. So Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind taking that portion of it.
Yes, happy to. So this is Director Perez, Community Services Director. I would say, and I know some of the history in terms of the connection that we've had with Chief Morales primarily, and that is Smith Park, as many of you know, has an area that was kind of designed around the Gabriel Tongva tribe, and he was a key part of that. He was a partner with the city. That was just before my coming to the city, so I'm sure that we have that information and have that documented. But he did work directly with the architects on that project and the designers on that project. And then similarly, more recently, the city has applied for a Prop 68 grant, and we were able to, our grant writers were able to interview Chief Morales for part of that project because we wanted to be able to incorporate that into the other areas of the park. That was part of our round 3 application. So we do have that file. I would need to look that up, but we do have that file. So he was able to meet with them directly, and our grant writer asked some questions, and then we were able to include that as part of our application. And so we've partnered with him on that. And then the other aspect would be that he participates every year with the Walk to LA and does the blessing for that. So that's been a very kind of a more consistent way that the tribal groups have participated with the city is participating with blessings, providing blessings at various events. And some of you may have seen that at some various events that we've had. Even we've had when Vincent Lugo, when we had a park grand reopening, they were present for that event as well. So if the committee was interested in gaining some of that information in terms of the history that we have with him from Smith Park and or the video that we would have done for the Prop 68 grant, we can compile that information and provide that kind of before that next meeting, if that's helpful.
I think that would be appreciated. And I'm happy to share along resources that we had given to ARG in terms of some of the First Peoples history. There's some good scholarship that's been done, and I'm happy to share that out with the committee as well.
Chair Lucas,
Yes,
I was just going to add that, yes, Councilwoman Menchaca, just recently for the 250th Jubilee anniversary for the San Gabriel Mission, there was a celebration, and Archbishop Gomez was there, But the program or the celebration began with a prayer from Chief Morales and his I guess family, and even the Archbishop recognized that the church was built by his family from the indigenous people. So I've seen that just recently. So there might be other ways that the Tonga tribe has participated, not just city events, but other church events, or other type of activity that we might not be aware of. But that was just the most recent one that came to mind.
If I may share the message.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I would just also add that while, at least in recent years, I think the Tonga Gabrielino tribe and Chief Morales have been more involved with city events, or as Director Perez mentioned, certain aspects and planning with the parks. Obviously, I think it shouldn't, we should reach out to the Quiche Nation and I honestly don't know who has succeeded Chief Salas, who I think, Chief Ernie Salas had recently, just last year, passed away. And so whoever, from the Salas family or other tribal leaders from the Quiche Nation, obviously, I think part of this effort is to make sure that we are as inclusive as we can be, and that we reach out to both tribes, as I understand it, equally. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more that we need to make this an inclusive process. So in terms of this particular agenda item, I know we're sort of tipping a bit into our action plan, and we can maybe fine tune in item B a little bit more what that process looks like. But are we okay to accept the questions and purpose statement as we've revised them during our discussion, and use those as our template for the interviews? So maybe, is it best if Matthew, I didn't see that this was an action item that needed a vote. Do I
would say, just for formality purposes, if we want to go ahead and have someone make a motion with any amendments. I think the only amendment was the removal of the translation question. And then that way we're good to go for future meetings.
Okay. So if I could have a motion to accept the purpose statement and the questions with the revision or removal of the translation question, I would be grateful.
I motion to approve the purpose statement and the questions with the revision to remove that one question.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I second that.
Thank you very much. And so then, Danielle, do you want to call by roll for a vote?
Commissioner Brenhall,
Aye.
Commissioner Maharo,
Aye.
Vice Chair Jennings Nunez,
Aye.
Chair Lubicic.
Aye.
Motion passed by a vote of 4 ayes, 0 nays, and 0 abstentions.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the discussion on this item very, very much. That brings us to item 4B, which is our Land Acknowledgement Statement Action Plan. So we will continue to fine tune this, but before we begin, Matthew, are there any public comments on this item?
There are none.
Okay. So I hope that everyone's had a chance to look at the action plan that was part of the agenda packet and see if there are any, I think one of the topics that we certainly need to clarify is what the meetings with tribal leaders would look like, and then any other revisions that we'd like to make to this action plan. So if everyone's all right with moving to this item and starting that discussion, I'd like to go again around the committee, and I'll start with Vice Chair Jennings Nunez.
Thank you. So, no, I think I did have one question Matthew mentioned. I don't know if he just didn't mention this permutation of things, but you mentioned if two people from the historical preservation or two from the HERE Commission wanted to meet with the tribal leaders, is it okay if 1 and 1 meets? Does that then put us into a different category? Or as long as it's just 2 people?
So unfortunately, since it would still be 2 members from separate bodies, we still get into that gray area where we are into the Brown Act. So I would recommend that it's kind of, the 2 options would be either all 4, or I should say all 6 advisory committee members meet with the tribal leaders in the public forum, or it would be 2, even if it was to meet with Chief Morales from, and let's say that's the HPCRC, and then the 2 HERE commissioners meet with the with Mr. Salas, with the Kish Nation, and then of course council can choose which one they're looking to join as well. That would give you the ability to have a more private forum for the discussion. But I would, defer back to the advisory committee as to how you would feel most comfortable approaching that.
I think personally, I think we're all very interested in speaking with both tribal leaders. I don't know if it would be better to invite them as guests to separate meetings so that each one has an opportunity to fully explore all those questions separately. So in terms of that meeting, given those limitations, my vote would be for us to hold an agendized meeting, a regular meeting, so that all of us can participate. I know I would personally really appreciate Chair Lubasich being part of whatever meeting I am in and to direct that. So, and to have that happen, we would need to make it one big meeting. So that would be my preference in terms of meeting with the tribal leaders. I don't know how much we want to go into the other items on the action plan. That to me is kind of the biggest. Next step is to get their input.
This is Director Perez. If I can also bring up, so Matthew and I have had a conversation about how logistically this might work. And we did have a discussion that for the sake of the meetings themselves and not having too much space, if you will, in between the meetings, that maybe what we could do would be to have the group meet with Chief Morales, for example, for an hour, let's say, and then have like a 15-minute break, and then meet with Chief Salas. So that might be an opportunity, just so that we wouldn't want there to be too much time, have like a 2 weeks or 3 weeks in between, which is probably what a meeting would be, just to logistically set that up. So that might be a point of discussion tonight as well. Matthew has actually looked at the dates and come up with a possible date that we can also put out there, but we haven't had a chance to get that confirmed with the tribal leaders yet, but just for point of discussion tonight, if the committee would want to discuss, does that seem like the route you would want to take in trying to accomplish those meetings?
Thank you. That's a helpful consideration. Commissioner Brenhag.
Sorry. I have a question. It might be, I don't know if it's a dumb question, but I wonder if there's any good in trying to maybe do it, I don't know if both ways, but like if we have like a smaller, less official meeting with them first, and just kind of like lay a groundwork of like what we're trying to do, and like these are why we're asking the questions. I'm wondering if that could be valuable, and then have the larger meeting where they can like have been prepared about what we're looking for and what questions they would like to answer. I'm wondering, could that work or make it easier for them? I don't know.
I see Vice Chair Jennings Nunez.
This is just I don't know if either Matthew or Rebecca, if you have spoken to Mr. Salas or Chief Morales to see if they've given any indication of what would work best for them. I don't, again, don't want to overburden them by asking them to attend several meetings. So even having to do a back-to-back, if they would be okay with limiting their discussion to an hour or, you know, that kind of format. Do you have any idea about what they would prefer, or if they're even aware that we're coming to them with requests for these questions to be discussed?
Yes, so we did have a brief discussion with Chief Morales, and he seemed open to the conversation. We didn't touch on specifically the way in which that would happen. I mentioned that it would either be in person or a formal or through GoToMeeting, but it would be a formal agendized meeting. There really wasn't a discussion as to whether or not it would be a more private meeting. And he did seem open to that. Of course, there was the initial reaction that I think anyone, regardless of the topic, would have of, oh, it's a public meeting. Then I really need to be careful about, how things are coming across. So there's always that initial kind of knee-jerk reaction. But at the end of the conversation, it didn't seem to be too much of an issue that it was a public meeting. I would say if the advisory committee is trying to be on the safe side as far as staying within the bounds of the Brown Act, staying equitable to both groups, that the suggestion that Rebecca provided of having one agendized meeting potentially on November 10th with a 15-minute break in between, with specified time for the questions to be provided and then responses given, would probably be the most equitable way to go about it. Our additional recommendation would be potentially to have one clear lead for the line of questioning, in particular in this case, potentially Chair Lubicic to lead the questions, especially since the committee has already kind of developed those as a team. So it's really just appointing that spokesperson to be sure that there's a clear contact. And of course, the advisory committee, if there was something urgent in that time where, something really did spur off based off of one question led to another, then potentially that would be available. But having one clear lead might be the best option in that case.
Thank you for that information or those suggestions. Other comments, questions about sort of the interview process as part of the action plan or other items on the action plan? Let's see, I didn't circle in with Commissioner Maharo.
Thank you. Actually, I get what Commissioner Brennan is saying. I do agree. I think that it would have been nice, I think, to, I don't know, a less formal meeting. I think it would allow us just a little bit more, either like Matthew said, would they be a little more candid? Would they be a little more comfortable breaking the ice, getting more information, providing information, getting comfortable with one another? I personally would like that, but I also understand the timing, and I think we may be able to achieve that if we do the suggested November 10th meeting, where it's an hour with that break, and then we have the second hour. I think we've discussed this enough to where we're as a committee are comfortable with the questions that we have, with the direction that we probably want to take, and we're all willing to absorb any education, any information that they're willing to provide. So I would say the November 10th meeting. I agree that November 10th, one formal meeting where we break up 1 hour where it's equal. What if it runs over an hour? Just give them equal time. I agree with that. I think that would work.
Thank you, Commissioner Maharo. Councilmember Pu?
Yeah, I also really like Michelle's idea, and it just also with respect to Director Perez's suggestion, if it works out that way, and we can schedule both sets of tribal leaders that in the context of the same meeting, but separately, then I think that would be fantastic. But I would also suggest that we allow them to invite or bring whomever they would like to, not just have only one person per se, be the sole voice and representative. Sometimes I feel better too if I have, sort of a team of folks who can also chip in and share potentially different perspectives or traditions or histories, even within the same culture or same tribe. And back to Michelle's idea, I think that I do like that idea, but I might reverse the order of what she suggested, which is do the formal public meeting first, and then if there were still issues, and if there was still a desire, as Vice Chair Jennings Nunez mentioned, and we're not, our intention certainly isn't to overburden anybody or pester them in any way. But if there was a mutual sort of interest in having a further, less formal conversation or follow up on some of the issues, then I also think that would be wonderful and fantastic. And we just sort of figure out a way to make that happen, while it may not be able to occur in the sort of formal setting of a public meeting. I'm sure it still could occur, and we'll figure out how to make it work. And I also just like to suggest that throughout this process too, the way I feel is that it can and should be a fairly, open, interactive, and sort of casual process, and that the more formalistic we make it, then sort of the less natural it may be, and in that sense, perhaps the less organic the responses, and perhaps I think at the end of the day, it's also about the feeling that's engendered between us as representatives of the city and each of these tribes. And if we come off as super formalistic, and then to me personally, that would be kind of a turnoff. But if we are, and I think we all have the right intentions here, we're respectful and willing to learn and wanting to support, and then I feel like that in some ways, not that we can't go wrong, but I think that again, that's why I feel very strongly confident about the sort of foundation and direction that the committee is already in, or has already been set in. And so I feel like we just go with that and continue to build these relationships. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And then Councilmember Menchaca.
Yes, just a couple things. For November, I know Council had that discussion last night. We might be going back to chamber. And so kind of take that into consideration. That could change things. Maybe an option would be if you want to have that kind of candid conversation, and if they want to bring some other members into the conversation, maybe we can consider changing the venue. Maybe it should just be open, at the Mission Playhouse outside, depending on the comfort level. But we are planning to start going live with, there will be guidelines. I believe there's still going to be some social distancing. It's not clear about the mask, but if you really want that comfortable kind of feeling, maybe the chamber's not the best place, just something to consider. The Grapevine Arbor, great outdoor area, put some chairs out there. And as long as it's public and we have the technology to show it, because we're going to continue with that, that could work. And then the second point, I think it's great discussion here. I know, there is always, like Matthew mentioned, some reservation sometimes because it's public. And I do like Michelle's idea of maybe having a precursor of some sort. And I don't know if the advisory committee is interested in maybe sharing some of the questions in advance so they have some preparation, or do you want it just really candid? I don't know, just to kind of put them at ease. But I do like what Michelle suggested. I know I like to know as much as I can in advance, do all my prep work. But maybe some people don't. Maybe, we talk a lot about Chief Morales. I don't know on the Quiche side who that person is, or that the new chief was even interested. I haven't heard any conversation about that. But anyway, just some things I wanted to share with the committee to maybe consider.
Thank you very much. I so appreciate the comments from my fellow committee members. Most of you said exactly what was in my head, and so I'm delighted with that. I am so disappointed that we can't go one-on-one, as Vice Chair Jennings-Nunez had asked. That really was one of my very first questions in terms of being able to talk with the tribal elders. And I am wholeheartedly in favor of what Commissioner Renhog had said about doing a precursor meeting, one that maybe is a little bit more small and intimate. I think a big part of this is building trust. And when people are concerned about being recorded and on camera, possibly, or in a public forum, I think that heightens anxieties, and let alone the formality of an agendized Brown Act meeting. So I think there's great value in building some trust with a smaller group, a pair of two people at the start. And I also really liked Councilmember Poo's recommendation that they be encouraged and invited to bring along people that they feel can help contribute to the discussion in this process. The Smithsonian had a symposium in September, and two of the tribal elders from San Gabriel participated in that. And it was really beautiful seeing how together they sort of wove the narrative, helping each other along the way. And as I watched them being interviewed for that symposium, I thought that was what I hoped we could engender as a committee in our conversations. So I think that's a wonderful recommendation. The only comment I had about the action plan is down in the section for meetings to develop the land acknowledgement statement. There are 2 bullet points that it would be drafted, presented to the 2 commissions for approval, and then on to the city council. And I would hope that we could add a step back into that process, where after drafting the land acknowledgement statement, we return to the tribal elders, really to make sure that we have captured what their concerns are, and in hopes that we would have their blessing to move forward with this. I don't want to assume that after an interview that we've got it. So I would love to add a step of bringing it back to the people with whom we spoke at the beginning, and just make sure that we did reflect what their contributions are and their concerns for this land acknowledgement statement. So those are the comments I had. As we did with I think the one issue we need to clarify is maybe that process. I know that there's a November 10th date that has been put out in terms of meetings. So in terms of the committee, is the interest it seemed that there were multiple of us who thought that a smaller, more intimate meeting would be helpful. Do we want to have that ahead of a more formal meeting or after? I see Dr. Perez and also Vice Chair Jennings-Nunez.
I'll let Dr. go first. She may answer my question.
Just to provide a little bit of clarification, I would say a couple of things in that I think the comment that Commissioner Brenhang made about a possible pre-meeting is a great one. I'll just say that scheduling that may be a little bit challenging. We have found it a little bit challenging in contacting the chiefs, and I agree with Councilmember Menchaca in that we want to be mindful of that. So while it's a great idea, maybe it's the sort of thing that we would need to see if that could even be scheduled. And then the other comment I wanted to make was regarding Councilmember Menchaca's comment. Yes, the council last night at their meeting did determine that the November 2nd, presuming that everything is back to normal with our elevator at City Hall, that the November 2nd meeting will likely be back in person. But I did just want to clarify, my understanding is that with the council's discussion last night about AB 361, I believe the number is, that it could be possible for meetings to be held virtually as well. And in talking with City Manager Lazaretto today about that, he was fine if the council members or the council meetings went back in person, but commission meetings were still held virtually. And just with our prior conversations with one of the chiefs, it seems like that may be more amenable to what they're comfortable with. And so I think we would want to be sure that they were comfortable in this setting as well, just out of health reasoning and those sorts of things. So just those couple of comments.
And then I also see, Samantha, you've got a comment to make.
Yes, Madam Chair, and what I would add is that the list of questions are not intended to be private questions for this meeting. They are a part of the agenda and they're posted. So really any member of the community, and there's anything that's helpful contributing to the LAS is welcome to provide information, whether it be to staff or submitting comments during one of the committee's meeting.
Thank you. That's a good point to make. Vice Chair Jennings Nunez.
No, I was just going to say again, confirming what Commissioner Brinhog said, or just agreeing with her, and with what Councilmember Pooh said in terms of meeting with them on a private way. But I think our goal there, as you said, Chair Lubicic, is just to build trust and kind of introduce ourselves. So maybe it can be done in a really less formal way, just with the phone call from one of us before the meeting, just kind of explaining what our purpose and goal is with the larger meeting and answering any questions for them. And I really liked what Councilwoman Menchaca suggested in terms of having the meeting in a less formal environment. So in front of the Mission Playhouse or at the Grapevine. And instead of making it kind of an interview that can seem a little confrontational sometimes, that we make it more, as you suggested, the Smithsonian did, with just a forum, that they're really, we're asking them to come and share their stories and provide education to our community. And we just would like to kind of sit down with them around a table and have them help us to learn more about them. So, it is still an interview, but just presenting it in a little softer manner.
I think that's a wonderful suggestion. Thank you for making it. So with that being said, for staff, does that give enough structure to be able to go ahead and move forward?
It does. So for the initial contact, I believe Vice Chair Jennings made this statement of maybe even a little less formal of doing the phone call. So potentially we could hop on the phone with or staff can hop on the phone with the designated committee member who wants to make that initial introduction. We can kind of go through what that process will look like for them on that day and see what they're most comfortable with at that time. That way, it is staying away from any and all Brown Act potential conflicts. It's still providing that introduction. It's still being welcoming. And then the other item would be we'll need to confirm with our other staff at City Hall, as well as with our city clerk's office, just as far as where and how we can host that meeting kind of at an offsite location outside of council chambers. I think it's all great ideas. I just want to be sure that we're following the rules, if you will, on that end, since typically these are posted on YouTube, and how does that technology transfer from location to location? So we can figure all of that out, and I would say if we can come up with a plan B or a plan A, which is this is the ideal situation, location, all of that, and then just plan B of, are we okay with doing the virtual meeting? If A, the tribal leaders are more comfortable with that, and two, if we don't have the capacity to do that at an on-site, but outside of council chambers situation.
Thank you. That sounds good if we can kind of figure out the logistics, but hold that as our tentative plan for now. So I think where we are in terms of our action plan is needing a motion for approval. I did it was my suggestion to add circling back. So if that pleases the committee, to approve the action plan with the addition of bringing the land acknowledgement statement back to the tribal elders that we've spoken with, I would be happy to have a motion and second.
I motion that we bring the LAS back to the tribal leaders once we have it completed, bring it back to them for approval or comment.
I second.
So I have a motion made by Commissioner Mahar and a second by Vice Chair Jennings Nunez. So Danielle, would you just do a roll call vote for me, please?
Commissioner Brenhall,
Aye.
Commissioner Maharo,
Aye.
Vice Chair Jennings Nunez,
Aye.
Chair Lubasich.
Aye.
Motion passed by a vote of 4 ayes, 0 nays, and 0 abstentions.
Thank you very much, Danielle. So that brings us to item C, which is our adjournment. So information regarding matters to be considered at each meeting will be available prior to the Land Acknowledgement Statement Advisory Committee meeting on the city website at www.sangabrielcity.com. And we adjourn tonight's meeting at 7:49 p.m. Thank you, everyone, very much.
Night, everyone.